Has your use of Terraform matured to the point that you're looking for a platform to help you with your automation and orchestration? That is the topic for today's Terraform Tuesday. What's up, everybody? It's Ned Bellavance, Ned1313 on Twitter, and welcome to Terraform Tuesday. Today is a sponsored episode from env0, env0, and they are a platform that provides automation and orchestration for Terraform deployments as well as TerraGrunt and Kubernetes. But we're specifically going to be sticking in the context of Terraform itself. Now, before I dive into the solution, I want to say thank you to env0 for sponsoring this episode. It's actually kind of a win-win for me because I was already in the process of evaluating some of the platforms that are out there for Terraform automation and orchestration, and they were definitely already on my list. And then they reached out to me and they're like, hey, we'd like you to do an episode and we'll help sponsor it. So thank you to env0 for helping feed my family and for giving me the opportunity to dive into their solution and see what it can do. Now, before we get into their solution, I want to talk a little bit about some of the gaps that exist when you start using Terraform open source in a more full-blown manner. When you first start out using Terraform, you're probably running it locally and you're using the local backend for your state data, and you're not worried about some of the gaps that exist in the open source product. But eventually you are going to have to fill those gaps in as your use matures and maybe it grows within the team that you're on. So what are some of the things that are missing within Terraform open source? Well, one simple thing that's missing is remote state management. Like I said, when you first start out, you're probably using the local file backend for your state data. But as you mature, you're going to want to move that to a remote location. And if you want to, you can set it all up yourself, but then you're responsible for managing the whole thing. It'd be nice if a solution would handle that remote state management for you. Another one is variable value management. Yes, you can set your variable values in a TF-vars file, or you can submit them at runtime, but it'd be really nice if there was somewhere else that those variable values were stored and maintained, and maybe even some way of inheriting values in a hierarchy. We'll get to that in a moment. Another big one is as your use grows and you're bringing in team members, role-based access control, being able to assign permissions to different users and teams to control what they can do to your deployed environments. Also, drift detection is a big thing. Ideally, people will not go into the environment and make changes, but you know that it's probably going to happen. You'd like to be able to detect when that happens. And of course, you can always do that by running Terraform plan yourself, but that's a manual operation. Wouldn't it be nice if something just automatically runs Terraform plan, says, oh, here's some drift, and what would you like to do about that drift? Do you want to remediate it? Do you want to update your config? You know, that part's kind of up to you, but at least it lets you know. Kind of closes that reconciliation loop. Obviously, Terraform doesn't have orchestration built in, so I would want a platform to include orchestration of the Terraform deployment workflow. And also, I don't want to run Terraform locally on my desktop once things move to a more advanced level. I want a standardized environment that Terraform is running within with a standard set of tools that are available for whatever workflow makes sense for me. So I probably want remote execution included in that solution as well. Okay, so that is what I'm looking for. That's my shopping list. Let's take a look at env0 and what it has to offer. env0 is a platform to manage your Terraform and infrastructure as code. And it's not just Terraform, like I mentioned. If you're using Pulumi, it supports that. If you want to do Kubernetes deployments, it supports that. But for our purposes, we're going to be focusing just on Terraform. So let me take you over to the actual environment once you log in. And this is the view that you will see when you initially log in. Now, I already have some things configured, and I want to point out a few things that you'll see in the portal right away. One is projects. Now, projects are what allow you to build this sort of hierarchy that you can apply both variable value management and permission management to. Each project is sort of its own self-contained thing. It has cloud credentials associated with it. It has variable values associated with it, and it has one or more environments inside of it. Now, initially, I thought of projects as a way to encapsulate a particular application, and each environment would be like dev, prod, staging, etc. But that's not exactly how I would recommend using it. In fact, I would think of each project as a self-contained instance of an application. And then different projects will be pointed at different environments in your target cloud, whatever you're deploying to. So you would have a prod project, a dev project, and then you can assign proper permissions based off of that project. At the organization level, that's sort of the top level of the hierarchy. There are some things that you can manage and set. And we can see we have projects over on the left. We also have templates, which are a way for you to create these predefined Terraform configurations, which then can be leveraged by projects that you present them to. And we're actually going to make use of one of those templates in our environment. Another one is the private module registry, which we'll get into more at a later point in the video. There's also variables, and this is super cool. This allows you as the organization administrator to set variable values at the organization level and have your projects and templates and environments inherit those values. That's pretty cool. And you have a lot of options on how those variable values are defined. So the two that I have defined here are an organization tag and a business unit tag. And you'll note that the value is actually a drop-down list. I can select one of these. Now, from the organization level, I can also add another option. But when this is inherited by something like a project, they'll only have access to what's in the drop-down list. So I can limit what values are available to use for that variable. That's pretty cool. You also have the ability to just add a free text variable that could be changed by an environment or a project, or HCL format if you need that, or JSON format if you need that. So lots of options there, as well as the capability to set environment variables for the runtime environment where Terraform is going to be executing. We also have some settings down at the bottom, and that's all organization level stuff. One thing I want to point out is the credentials area, which is where you can add things like cloud credentials that will be used by the various projects to do their deployment. So I've set up Azure credentials for a dev subscription and a prod subscription. And I've also set up cost credentials for the dev and prod, and that is part of the cost estimation and tracking that env0 can do. So that's everything at the organization level. Let's take a look at the project level. I have one project at the moment. That's my Taco Dev project. So this is for development environment deployments, and I don't have any active environments deployed. If we look at some of the other elements of the project, we have project templates. So here's that template that's defined at the organization level. I'm presenting that template here, and I can make use of it in one of my environments. I also have project variables. So just like you can define variables at the organization level, I can also define variable values at the project level. And because this is my development project, I've set an environment variable to the value of dev. So any environments that I create inside of this project will inherit that variable value from the project level. That's pretty convenient. And then if we take a look at the project settings, in here is where I can select the credentials that will be used by this project. So I'm using the dev subscription credentials and also the dev subscription cost credentials. And if we go over to the teams area, we can assign different teams permissions to this project to be able to do different things. So here's my role-based access control. I can have roles that are assigned to teams and then put users in those teams. And there you go. Now I can control who can do what with these various projects. That's kind of useful. All right, so I've mentioned environments a bunch of times. Let's actually deploy an environment. And we're going to start by clicking on Create a New Environment. And I'm going to make use of the template that's been presented to me, but I could also hook this directly into a repository in a version control system. I'll click on template and it presents me with the one template I have available, and I will click on run now to get this going. Now it presents me with a wizard to fill out a few things. The template itself is also a repository in source control, and I can select a different branch to track for this particular environment. And I probably want to track the development branch. So I've selected that here. I also can select to redeploy on every push to this Git branch. So when a push happens to the development branch, run an update to this environment. And also if a pull request comes into this branch, run a Terraform plan to let me know what that change would happen if I accepted that pull request. I can also enable drift detection. Hey, drift detection, that's something useful. And the format for this is actually a cron job format. So I would ideally like a dropdown or something a little more user-friendly for this, but I understand why it's like this right now. So hey, maybe that's a potential improvement feature, but I put in that I want it to run every hour. So just check and make sure every hour and let me know what happened, whether things have drifted away from the way it's defined in my Terraform config. Okay, now let's hit the variables and we can see it's inherited my organization variables. It's also inherited all of the values that are defined for the template. So I can also define variable values at the template level and have those be inherited, but they can also be altered here. And there's the project variable right there. So I also have my project variable being inherited from the project level. Now, I don't want to change anything here. I'm happy with all these values. So I'm just going to scroll down to the bottom and click on run, and that will kick off the workflow that will perform Terraform in it. It'll manage the state data. It'll run a Terraform plan, and then it's going to present me with the plan of what it's going to deploy, as well as a cost estimation for how much this project is going to run me, or this environment, I should say, is going to run me. So if we scroll down here, it's walking me nicely through all the different steps that it's taking. And one thing I want to point out here is there's these before and after steps, and that's going to allow you to create custom workflows that execute during these before and after steps in the workflow. And we're going to take a look at that in a little bit. Okay, so let's scroll down and see where we are in our process. Right now, it's running Terraform plan, so that's in progress. Once the Terraform plan is complete, it's going to wait for approval. And if I expand out, now it shows me the entirety of the Terraform plan. It's going to create 9 new resources in the target environment. And it won't actually let me approve until the cost estimation piece is complete. Now it's going to tell me this is going to run me about $74 a month. That's fine. It all looks good to me. I click on approve, and now it's going to go through the Terraform apply portion of things. Now that's going to take a little while to complete. So while we're waiting on that, let's talk a little bit more about some other features we might want in a solution that's running at scale. As your use of Terraform grows and you've adopted one of these platforms, you are probably going to find there's some other things you want as you begin to run at scale. So let's review what some of those things might be. And I think the number one thing is extensibility and custom workflows. Let me do what I want. And that includes things like maybe I want to run Terraform validate in my workflow before it gets applied. That seems to make sense. Maybe I want to use checkoff to check to make sure I'm following best practices and not violating any policies. Maybe I want to run open policy agent to check my Terraform plan to make sure it's in line with policies that were defined by my platform team. There's a lot of customization you might want to do in the workflow, and those are all things that env0 allows you to do. Now, the big thing is cost estimation and tracking. So not only estimating the cost initially, but tracking that cost over time so you can see if, wait a minute, this project is suddenly costing a lot more than I initially thought. Maybe I want to go back and look at the config a little bit and tweak a few things. Another big thing is hierarchy. And that's something that we already saw. There's a built-in hierarchy for env0, but that's something that, especially as your real estate grows and your use matures, when you have 100 different environments you're deploying to, or 1,000 different environments, being able to group things together and manage permissions in those groupings starts to make a lot of sense. Another big thing is management of cloud credentials, being able to add cloud credentials and make them available to different projects within your general organization. That's going to be huge. And the last one is private module registries. Some organizations don't want to store the modules they're developing in the Terraform public registry, so why not have a private registry where you can store those custom modules that might have something proprietary you don't want available to anyone else? So those are all some additional features. Let's go back to the env0 environment and take a look at how those things are implemented there. All right, we are back in the portal and our deployment has completed. And if we click on the output, it will give us the app URL. Why don't we just drop that in? And it's a cute kitten. It's a taco cat. Huh? You get it? So that's what the actual deployment is. It's spinning up a single Azure virtual machine and deploying an application to serve up that delightful kitten when you go to the web URL. So this deployment completed successfully. Why don't we walk through creating a brand new project for prod, and I'll point out some of the additional things that I just talked about. So we're going to go back to projects here, and I'm going to create a new project and call it Taco Prod, right? This is my Taco Cat Prod project. Once that project is created, we're going to have to configure some settings. So let's go down to project settings. And I'm going to go straight into credentials. I need to provide credentials to this project to use for the various environments. And in this case, I'm going to select the prod subscription deployment credentials. So I'll go ahead and configure those too and save each of those. Now, if I was delegating out the use of this project, I could set it so that a team working within the confines of the project doesn't have access to change or alter their credentials. They can just use them as part of their deployments in their environments. Okay, those credentials are now saved. And for the moment, I'm not going to set any policies or notifications, although I'll point out for notifications, there is integration with both Slack and Teams to send messages to those two platforms. Okay. Now let's go into project variables. And just like I did before, I'm going to create a project variable here, and I'm going to name it environment because that is what I want to set. There we go. And the environment name is prod. And now that will be used by all of the environments that are going to be deployed within the context of this project. All right, awesome. So I have that variable value set. Now, if I go into project templates, I don't see any templates right now. I need to add templates. So I'll click on add templates, and here's my basic web app template. I'll select that and click on save, and now that project template is available. Now, before I go ahead and deploy that template, maybe this is a good time to take a look at what's actually in that template. Now, as I mentioned, that template is linked to a version control repository, and it's in GitHub. It's this one right here, env0-app-example. And I do want to point out a couple things. We already know what this deploys. It deploys a virtual network using a module, and it also deploys an Azure virtual machine running a basic web server that's going to serve up that delightful taco cat. Now, if we scroll down and take a look at the main.tf, one thing I want to point out is the module section. Hey, there's the network module that we're using. And if you look at the source for that, it's pulling from api.env0.com. That's right. This is pulling from the private module registry. Hey, that's kind of cool. So let's go back to env0 here, and I'll go into module registry. And there is my basic VNet module called network. Let's go ahead and click on that and take a little deeper look at what goes into that module. Now, this module is pulling from a VCS repository, which is also in GitHub. And let's take a look at the most recent version, 1.0.1. It pulls the information from the README in the repository to give you an idea of what it does. And then on the instructions tab, it tells you how to use this module in your configuration. And the first one gives you the basic module block with the source that you would grab it from and the version that you've selected from the dropdown. The second block is for scenarios where you want to test this locally, not running on one of the remote runners from env0. Those remote runners already have credentials to talk to this private module registry, but you don't. So you have to add this credentials block to your Terraform RC file so that you have permissions to contact this private registry and get the actual module. So this is the module that we're using in our configuration. And if you wanted to follow along with this whole process, check out the README file that is in the app example repository. It'll walk you through forking this repository as well as the one that has the network module in it so that you could follow along and try it out yourself. Okay, so that covers the private registry portion of things. Let's go back here and actually stand up the environment. So I'll select Create New Environment. Once again, we're using a template. And I'll click on Run Now for my basic web app template. And now, instead of going with the development branch, I'm going to stick to the main branch because this is my production deployment. And I'll keep the same settings for redeploy and run Terraform plan. And for drift detection, I will mirror the same settings that we had for development. Now, within variables, if we scroll down here, there is one variable in the template that is for virtual machine size, and that's set to standard D2SV5. Now, maybe this is production, baby. I don't want to run this tiny little D2. I need a more robust system here. So let's bump that up to D16. And I'm doing that deliberately because that's actually going to violate a policy that we're checking in our custom workflow. I'll leave everything else the same, scroll down and click on Run here, and that will kick off the deployment of this environment. While that deployment is happening, let's go back to the repository and take a look at this file env0.yaml. This is what defines the custom workflow components, and env0 looks for this YAML file in the repository and loads it as part of the workflow process. Now, within here, you're basically defining what it should do for particular steps in the workflow. So first you identify which step you're targeting, and then where in that step you want to do something. So after it does set up variables, I want it to run this process to install Open Policy Agent, OPA, on this remote runner, so then I can use OPA later. So that's just going to use curl chmod and OPA version to print out and show that OPA is actually installed. Then after the Terraform, before Terraform init runs, I'm going to run an ls to see what files are in there, just so you can see what's in there, and then also cat out what's in the tf vars to see what values are being used for the variables. And then after Terraform init runs, I'm going to run Terraform validate to validate that my configuration is all good. And then finally, after Terraform plan happens, I'm going to take the contents of the saved Terraform plan file and convert it to JSON. And I need to do that in order to run OPA against it. And then I'm going to run an OPA evaluation, and I'm going to load in the data from the JSON file that I just created and run it against a policy that's defined in policy.rego to see if it violates the VM size that I've set within that Rego policy. And if we go back to the environment that I just ran, sure enough, there's a violation here. The deploy failed, and it gives me the error message up top. Standard D16S v5 is not allowed. That's too big. Now, before we fix the problem, I just want to show a few things here. So if we look at load variables, here's the variables that are loaded up. If we look at the after Terraform init step, it ran our Terraform validate and let us know that the configuration is valid. That's what we were hoping to see, right? And then if we scroll down to after Terraform plan, this is where it ran OPA, and it determined that there was a policy violation based off this query that we've included in the command. Now, if we want to know what the actual allowed sizes are, that's something that could be added to the error message here, or you can go back to the repository, and in there's the policy.rego file. And I'm brand new to Rego, so don't worry if a lot of this doesn't make sense to you. The important part is down here under allowed VM sizes regular expression. I set up a regular expression that looks for anything that's standard series D or E v5 and is between 2 and 8 vCPUs. Because I selected 16, that's outside of the boundary, and so it's a policy violation. So I need to slim back the size of the virtual machine that I'm using. In order to do that, I am going to go back up to the top and select redeploy. And then under my variables, I'll scroll down and I'm going to update this value from D16 to D8 and go ahead and click on run. Now that I've put it within the constraints, this should run successfully and wait for me to approve it. Jumping forward a little bit in time, if we take a look at the after Terraform plan stage in here, it ran the OPA evaluation and there was no output at the end, which means that there were no policy violations. So it considers that a success. We can see that the cost estimation has jumped up a bit than our development environment because I'm using a bigger virtual machine size. And it's just waiting for me to approve the environment. I'll go ahead and click approve. That's going to finish in the background. Let's summarize what's included in the env0 solution and a few things that didn't make it into the video that I do want to mention before we close out. There's a whole bunch of other things that are part of the env0 solution that just couldn't all fit in this video. So I just want to mention a few of those briefly. One is that single sign-on is supported. So if you're using Okta or Azure Active Directory or something like that, single sign-on is there, no problem. Another one is that we didn't even take a look at the dashboards, but there are dashboards that help you monitor the health of your deployments for your projects and your environments. Now, you know me, I prefer to do things through Terraform and deployments rather than clicking around in an environment. But that doesn't make for always a great demo. There is a fully robust Terraform provider for env0. So all of the things that you saw me doing in the UI, you can configure all of that with Terraform. Now, using Terraform to configure your Terraform orchestrator, that's like a chicken and the egg kind of thing. That's a topic for a whole other video. But if you wanted to, you can absolutely do that. If you're in an environment where these remote agents aren't going to work for you because the infrastructure you're managing is not publicly accessible, you can set up self-hosted agents as opposed to using the remote provided agents that they have. And finally, there is the capability to set limits on environments and also TTLs on environments. So if you wanted to have an environment self-destruct after a certain amount of time, you can absolutely do that. And that's actually kind of a neat feature for when you're setting up like a testing environment or a dev environment that needs to be short-lived and you want to kind of keep your costs under control. So those are some of the things that couldn't make it into the video, but I wanted to let you know about. That's going to do it for today's Terraform Tuesday. Thank you so much for viewing. If you want more info about env0 and everything they do, just go to env0.com, sign up for a free account. Everything you saw me do today in the demos, that was all part of the free tier. I didn't have to swipe a credit card. They didn't give me any special access. So you can definitely try and drive it for yourself. If you want to use the demo files that I used in today's video, those are available. There's links to the repositories in the description, along with a robust README in one of those repositories that will help you set up what you need on the env0 side, the Azure side, and the GitHub side to get everything up and running. Big thanks to env0 for sponsoring this episode. That was awesome. If you're a vendor out there and you're interested in a sponsored video, I am open to that idea. So touch base with me and let me know. Hey, and for all you viewers out there, thank you so much for watching. I do this for you, and I want to hear your feedback. So if you try out this solution, or if you just have general feedback, let me know. The best way to reach me, honestly, is Ned1313 on Twitter, or hit me up on LinkedIn. Lastly, please subscribe to the channel if that's your thing, if you've enjoyed this video. Until next time, stay healthy, stay safe out there. Bye for now. You might have spied this little guy in the background during the video, and you'd be like, is that a taco? Ned, did you get a taco in the background? I did, and this is Paco the Taco. He's awesome, and he's now on board with me for all my future videos. Thanks again. Bye.